Hey, hooray! We are past the halfway point of the course. That's great news. And you're well past the halfway point for written assignments. That means your papers and things. So that's all good news, right? We only have a couple more big papers to write. And then, of course, we continue to have the course discussion. So let's quickly just go over where we've been and where we're going, okay? So we've discussed the environmental issues, all these different problems that we've got going on environmentally. We discussed worldviews, like how are we going to address this. There's different perspectives on this. Some people take it extraordinarily seriously. Other people could not care less about environmental issues. So there's these different worldviews, the cornucopians and the neo-Malthusians. And then we get into these principles of sustainability, basically like how do we close open loops of consumption and consideration of the circular economy. Okay, so then we discuss critical thinking and total environmental perspective, basically that it's how we think about stuff that's going to get us to solutions, and we have to have a good quality thinking, right? So we know that human and social systems, which are the political and economic components, they have to consider the impacts of the actions on physical and social environmental systems when they plan for action. So this is really important when you talk about things like decisions that the WTO takes and decisions that our own Congress takes and decisions about who we vote for and who do we want to be running this country. When you think about critical thinking, you realize we have to accommodate the operation of natural systems to support all life, including the sustainability of human life, and not just subsistence, right? We're talking about the sustainability of all types of life, and how do we get there, and understanding the relationship of economics and politics with the fundamental reality of how the environment works. Okay, so next slide. Let me fix that. There we go. So science, right? So science, the point of it is to help us recognize truth from fiction, right? And we have to understand the difference between science and pseudoscience, so fake science. And it could not be more important to understand that now, since there's so much bad information out there because of the internet and Twitter and all these other social media sources that are out there that continue to propagate bad information. A lot of them, it's just to promote a lot of fear, to get you to vote a certain way or to think a certain way, to promote their own agenda. So fear is also kind of a tool, right? We also have to beware of the anecdotal information, or some people call it evidence. It's really not. It's just a perspective. So you see it on the news all the time, right? Whenever they're showing something on the news on television, they typically have an interview with a man in the street and then what he thinks about something. That's anecdotal evidence. That's not the same as scientific evidence, or evidence that would even be floated through things like through the legal system, right? Okay, so we need science to collect data and evaluate data. Okay, all right, and then one of the studies that we did, we looked at just this. You wrote this paper about agricultural techniques. Can organic agriculture, methods of organic agriculture, be enough to feed the global population? And so you read 3 papers. We looked at the science in order to answer that fundamental question, and generally the evidence pointed out by 2 of the 3 authors was that yes, organic methods of agriculture could feed the global population. Does that mean we're going to be doing that? I'd say highly unlikely. I think that the quantity of organic agricultural commodities is something like 3% of the total. But nonetheless, the point is the science, right? You have to have the science first in order to guide policy. That's the idea. Okay, so we also discuss history of trade, right? So many people think that global trade is a recent phenomena. It's not, right? Remember why Christopher Columbus was heading out west, right? He was looking for spices, right? Global trade. And so it's not recent. And however, with global trade, we've had winners and losers. So you have some countries that do better, some countries that have done worse, some environments that have been exploited, some people that have been exploited, and all of this in the pursuit of capitalism, that we've learned over time that capitalism eventually won out over all other systems of how we manage the global economy. So will modern trade moderate the imbalances, or will it exploit people and the environment? Will that continue? Or are we going to use globalization to improve our relationship with the environment and each other? That's one of the keys. Okay, so in our Introduction to Globalization lecture, we talked about this massive expansion of globalization that happened after World War II, the pros and cons of that, some of the governing structures of trade organizations, which we'll be getting into greater depth in the second half, and an introduction into the World Trade Organization, another topic that we're covering in greater depth in the second half. And then we discussed Davernay and his article about what globalization was. That was your very first assignment, your written paper. So we talked about the role of global poverty, right? And that trade is said to help improve countries and that have significant poverty. Does it? Well, the answer to that is yes, it has. There's been a huge reduction in the number of people in poverty, but it's still out there and it's still a problem, right? And so then we get to this other question about global trade, and that is this the pressure of created by capitalism, does that put pressure on industry then to pursue continuing to reduce costs so that they have better competitive advantage so that they can make more profit? And then does all of that then lead to what we call a race to the bottom, meaning it reduces human rights, drives down wages, causes environmental problems? Is global trade causing that? There's a lot of evidence that says yes, it does. Okay, and then in that, as we looked into that, we did answer some questions. You had 10 questions or so about just to get you to understand some elements of global poverty, so we could have some science there and some policy to understand what's going on with that. We talked about ecological footprints, how do we measure them? And we heard from Eugene Cordero, who's on campus. He teaches here on campus, and his main thing is global climate change. And then we talked more about sustainability methods, right? With that we could be pursuing about economics, sustainable growth, circular economy, meaning closing open loops of consumption, industrial ecology, which mimics natural ecosystems, saying basically that humans we can just copy what nature does. And then we looked at supply chains, and we had a lecture on that from Arvinda Lumba about supply chains. More about sustainability, about industrial ecology. You did a paper on that. You answered some questions basically about what it is so you could understand how we can move towards sustainability. And we looked also at eco-design strategies about how to select low environmental impact materials, avoiding hazardous materials, efficiency. That's the key of materials use. Designing products for waste minimization, DFE, DFD, design for the environment, design for disassembly, those concepts, so that things could be then products could be recyclable and made of recycled content materials, because that pursues closing open loops of consumption. So coming attractions, right? So what are we going to do next? What's on the menu? Well, the World Trade Organization, which maybe you saw that one today. Then there's the United States, Mexico, Canadian accord or agreement, and that has recently been adopted, and that is replacing NAFTA, or the North American Free Trade Agreement. And we'll be discussing the Dual System Deutschland. It's also known as the Green Dot. It's a system used in Europe. It was created in Germany to close open loops of consumption that was created primarily by industry and the types of packaging that they were using for their products. Basically, it just said that government was tired of paying for discarding things that, and required industry to take back the problem. And when they did, industry made less of it. So I already said too much about that. So that's why we're talking about packaging, and we have a great lecture from a highly respected packaging professional. He's taught here at San Jose State and runs a packaging business, so you'll hear from Herb Schuneman on packaging. And we'll be talking about extended producer responsibility, which is much like the Dual System Deutschland, except that it's not just about packaging. It's different things that we've got going on here in California, for example, about things like paint and oil and electronics and mattresses that require industry to take back these products that they have made that you and I have to pay for discarding. So it's about internalizing externalities. We'll also talk about agricultural commodities and fair trade. You were introduced to the concept of fair trade earlier, and now we're going to get into a little bit in depth, and we'll do that as we talk about these three agricultural commodities: bananas, coffee, and chocolate. Then we get into a little bit of alphabet soup, meaning the ISO and WE and RoHS. That's the International Organization of Standards, the Waste Electronics Initiative, and the Restriction on Hazardous Substances. All of these things are related to improving efficiencies and reducing environmental problems. We'll delve into environmental justice a bit and discuss green building. It's basically how buildings can use less energy and in some cases even be made of recycled content products. And then we'll end up the course lectures and talking about ecotourism, because what better time to talk about ecotourism than just before you leave campus and give yourself a break and a nice vacation somewhere. All right, so that's what we'll be doing soon, and I'll catch you later. Bye.